Tonight's talk on Farmland Birds with Simon Boyce, who's the Vice County Recorder for Birds in Montgomeryshire, will now follow. If you'd like to see the Big Farmland Bird Count talk being presented by Matthew Goodall from GWCT, then please have a look at our other videos on the Biz YouTube channel, and you'll find Matthew's talk on the Big Farmland Bird Count there. The video that now follows is Farmland Birds. So welcome to Simon Boyce, who's going to share his knowledge and photos, mostly from Keith Noble. Thanks to Keith for the photos for you tonight, and to let you know all about some of the birds that are likely to be seen in and around farmland. So over to you, Simon.
Everyone, I'm Simon Boyce. I'm the bird recorder for Montgomeryshire, and let's get this presentation up.
Yep, it's there, I can see it.
Brilliant. Then can I just say, and Simon, before we start, about people asking questions in the chat bar? I don't think that's been mentioned yet, so just for anyone who wants to ask any questions throughout any of the presentations, obviously everyone's on mute, so if you've got a question, please write it in the chat bar that you'll find on the bottom of your screens. Thank you.
Thank you, Matt. So, Farmland Birds, can you all see the screen? And can you all hear my voice? Good.
Yes.
Just a word or two quickly about myself. I was lucky enough to have been an ornithologist throughout my working life, having started leading bird tours in 1977 and continuing doing that to all different continents for the next 40 years. And I've only recently retired, mainly thanks to the present pandemic. So tonight we'll be talking about farmland birds, primarily in Wales, but I see many of you are not from Wales. So, well, farmland birds in general then. I am not a bird photographer. So at this point, I am going to record my thanks to Keith Noble, who presented the BIS garden bird talk a couple of weeks back, who has provided most of the pictures that you will see in tonight's presentation. And we start off with one I'm sure you're familiar with, the red kite. It's made a remarkable comeback from the low point of 5 pairs in Britain in 1905. And throughout my childhood, they were certainly a very rare bird, only in the Welsh Hills. But thanks to many reintroduction projects in England and the strengthening of the genetic pool, they're now breeding very well throughout England and Wales. The red kites, as you probably know, are mostly scavengers, not predators, and will be a familiar sight to many farmers and those surveying farmland. On now to our commonest bird of prey throughout Britain, the buzzard. Also a scavenger, but a predator as well. It'll eat anything from earthworms to rabbits and roadkill. And this is what it sounds like. I've put in some video clips, some sound clips. Can you hear that?
Yep.
And there's the typical buzzard call, and you hear that a lot when they're they always seem to be aggressive, the crows, towards buzzards. Staying with the bird of prey theme for a moment, we move on to a sparrowhawk, and this is a beautiful picture of Keith's of a male sparrowhawk with the rosy breast. Females are brown and more streaked, but without the grey and the rosy plumage. The females are twice as large as the males. The male is a really small bird, only the size of a missel thrush. And they are also quite common on farmland now, having recovered from a low point in the 1960s when pesticides were at their worst and DDT was in the mix. But luckily those days are behind us. Sparrowhawks are flourishing. There's been a lot of fake news about predators reducing songbird populations, but it's not the sparrowhawks and so on that have any effect on songbird populations. That's much more down to habitat loss and things like that. So look out for sparrowhawks on your farms, on your farmland surveys. They love to fly along a hedge and flip very quickly over to the other side to take an unsuspecting sparrow or a finch that might be just perched on the other side. Also on our farms, but not often seen during survey work, is the barn owl, but nevertheless an important part of our farmland bird mix. We have about 5,000 pairs nesting in Britain, and in my county, Montgomeryshire, we have about 35 pairs in a typical year. Their numbers fluctuate a lot. They may nest in a barn or in a hole in a tree, as most of ours do where I live, or in a box that's specially put up for them. And although you won't see them much while you're surveying, you should know that they are around. And in winter, they do have to come out at dawn and dusk to make their hunting more viable. So that's our raptors. Now on to game birds. I decided I wouldn't put a picture of a pheasant in. I thought you'd all manage a picture of a pheasant, but you may not be so familiar with the red-legged partridge, another non-native bird like the pheasant, but they are nevertheless put down for shooting on a number of farms throughout Britain, and they're flourishing. Unlike our native partridge, the grey partridge, which is not flourishing at all and is still declining. This is the call of the red-legged partridge. And sometimes that will alert you to partridges around, even if you haven't actually seen them. They always sound rather asthmatic to me. So that's the red-legged partridge. Sticking with other large birds that you may be lucky enough to come across on your farms are two species of waders, both declining as breeding species, but in the case of the lapwing here, still visiting us in large numbers in the winter due to winter arrivals from Scandinavia and places as far east as Russia. The lapwing, a bird of damp meadows, has lost a lot of ground because of agricultural intensification over the last 50 years. But still in winter, we get flocks flying in with these lovely big round wings, white underneath, so they give a very black and white appearance when they fly together. And you may see them on winter stubbles and ploughed land where they feed in flocks in the winter, sometimes with golden plover. And this is the lapwing call. If you are very lucky, you may see curlew on your farms. We still certainly have some curlews visiting in many areas of Wales. They breed mostly up in the mountains, but it's not unheard of for them to nest in rough agricultural areas as well. They've lost a lot of ground again because of agricultural intensification, but you may still see them. And listen out for the call. First, you'll hear the alarm call, and then a little bit of the superb display song that the bubbling song that you hear in spring. So that's the alarm. And there's the song. So they probe their long bills deep into the ground after worms. And what you may not know is that the females have a longer bill than the males, which is believed to be an adaptation for drought conditions, so that in very hard times, the females can reach worms that the males cannot reach, which helps her to lay her eggs. Now, you may think, what's a seagull doing in a farmland presentation? Well, lesser black-backed gulls, like the one in the center of the picture there, have become very much farmland birds. They're very common around us in mid-Wales. They follow the plough, and they're always present when there's silaging and when there's muck spreading going on in our fields. Around the sides of the picture, all around, you'll see a smaller gull. This is the black-headed gull, which is not a seagull. They don't nest coastally, they nest in freshwater marshes, but they also flock to farmland areas. There was a flock around us last week following some muck spreading. So look out for the larger dark-backed black-backed gull, the lesser black-backed gull, and also the black-headed gull. Only in the winter does it have a dark head. Sorry, only in the summer. In the winter, it just has a black spot on the cheek, as you can see with the one bottom right there. Onto the pigeon family. This is the most familiar of our pigeons, the wood pigeon. 3 million pairs breed in the UK, and it's easily our commonest. You'll be familiar with their repeated song, I'm sure. Wakes me up in the morning, winter or summer. They have an amazingly long breeding season, and eggs have actually been found in every month of the year. But a normal pair will nest about 5 times in a season, producing 2 young each time if they're successful. But of course, as with all birds, there's a big mortality as the season finishes and winter comes along. So take a good look at this wood pigeon with a white eye and a white neck, and compare it with this lesser known pigeon, the stock dove. It's a common bird on our farmland here in Wales. I'm sure it is in many different parts of Britain too. It has a big black eye and a green patch on the neck, and it nests in holes in trees, unlike the wood pigeon. And this is their call. So you may not be so familiar with the stock dove, but they will join in with flocks of wood pigeons on farmland, and so keep a lookout for them. And the collared dove is not a native. It arrived for the first time in 1955 in Britain, following a remarkable expansion westwards from their breeding grounds in Asia and in Eastern Europe. This is a bird that you might find around the farmyard. They love to feed on spilt grain, and they like to nest in cypresses and leylandii trees, which are often planted around farm buildings. So listen out also for the call of the collared dove. A 3-note call. On to the crow family, not everyone's favorite. This is the carrion crow, very successful species. That old saying about crows being on their own and rooks being in flocks is only true really when it comes to the way that they nest, because carrion crows do nest apart from other crows, singly in a treetop somewhere, whereas rooks always nest colonially in treetops. The call of the carrion crow always has a note of anger about it. To me, that's how I distinguish it. Listen. And they can sound a lot angrier than that as well. Now compare that with the plumage of the rook. It is glossier with these feathery trousers. So it looks a shaggier, untidier bird than the carrion crow. And it always has this bare patch of skin at the base of the bill, giving it a sort of white-faced appearance. Now, the rook is really a farmer's friend. So don't get your shotguns out. The rook is responsible for feeding on large quantities of leather jackets, which you see there up in the top left of the picture. That is the larva of the crane fly or the daddy longlegs. And they are not the farmer's friend. So rooks are to be encouraged. They're also declining, and have a listen to their call. Similar to the crow, but without that real note of anger about them. They've been to anger management classes, as someone said to me once. So that's the rook. And on to our smallest corvid, a member of the crow family, the jackdaw, which may nest in holes in trees, which it often battles with stock doves over. They share the same kinds of holes, or maybe in a church tower, in a chimney of an old building, or in quarries they nest. The jackdaws are also to be found very much in the fields with the rooks and the crows. They're smaller than the others are, and they always have this grey nape. The back of the neck is grey and the pale eye. Have a listen to the jackdaw. And it's that Joe call that gives them their name. That's the jack of the jackdaw. So that's our crow family. Now the next three I'm going to mention, you will not be seeing for the next few months because they're all in South Africa. But I must mention them briefly in passing because they're very much a feature of farmland birds, particularly the swallow here, with a dark back, a dark rump, and the long tail streamers. Compare that with the house martin here, with the white, see the white rump, that's the lower back, and the overhang above the nest. So house martins always build under the eaves of houses. They're also in southern Africa at the moment. And the one that isn't related to them at all, but is often surprisingly confused with the swallows and martins, is the swift. But the swift is really very different. It's all dark. You never see it perching. And it's not related to the swallows or martins at all. They're actually related to hummingbirds and nightjars. And they nest more in our cities and towns and villages, but they do feed over farmland. So that's three summer visitors that you won't be seeing for a while yet. Starlings we have in large numbers in the winter, although as a breeding bird they have declined a lot over the last few years. But we still have these huge flocks that come in from Scandinavia and Russia in the winter. There is the adult plumage, and here is the juvenile plumage, the young birds just beginning to molt there in that picture into the adult plumage, getting their spots. And of course, starlings are famous for these wonderful murmurations that they make. They fly around in these great flocks and dive down into reed beds and other safe roosts. Aberystwyth Pier, if you've been watching Winter Watch. And this was taken by one of our Montgomeryshire photographers, and as he clicked the picture, the murmuration took on the shape of a flying duck's head. You may be able to see that. And a moment after that, they dived down into the reeds on one of our reserves here in Montgomeryshire. Now onto the thrush family. And these, here too, we have migrants. This is the redwing, a small thrush, smaller than a song thrush, that mostly breeds in Scandinavia, Iceland also, and they come down in huge numbers in October to feed on our berries. They start with hawthorns, the haws, and then they move on to ivy and all kinds of other berries. Hear their call. You'll hear them sometimes overhead at night, especially when they first arrive in October. That high-pitched whistle. And you hear that chook as well. The chook call is usually when they're feeding, and the high-pitched whistle is usually a flight call. Very gregarious, they often in big flocks and often with fieldfares as well. This is the fieldfare. It's a larger thrush, the size of our blackbird, also nesting in Scandinavia and coming down here in large numbers to visit farms and feed on the ground, and also you see them perched up in hedges. This is the fieldfare call. Now, you'll all know what a blackbird looks like, but I just put this picture in to remind you that the female blackbird is not a black bird, but a brown bird. And they're extremely common, of course, throughout the year. But in winter, we do have large flocks flying in also from the continent. And I can look out of my window and see 5 or 6 in the nearest field in the winter, where there would just be 1 or 2 in the summer. So don't forget the blackbird. Now here's one that you would be lucky to spot on farmland, but it's an important habitat for the wheatier when it first arrives in the end of March and in April, and before they leave in September, October. So the wheatier, which is a summer visitor, is a small bird, not much bigger than a robin. The name means white arse, after that white rump you can see there under the at the base of the back. And the wheatier nests high up in our mountains, but when they first arrive and before they leave, they often come onto farmland. You'll see them in ploughed fields sometimes. That would be a nice bird to add to a farmland survey, but it won't be until the end of March or April. So look out for wheatiers. And the skylark, a very important member of our farmland fauna, not so brilliant in plumage. They have this crest that's very distinctive, which is sometimes laid flat on the head and sometimes raised. But it's when they open their beaks and sing that they really come to people's attention. And first, let's just have a listen to the skylark. First, you'll hear the call that you would typically be given in winter, rather like a pied wagtail call. And then you hear a little burst of the spring song. That's the call note. And there's the wonderful song. Now, skylarks are one of many birds that love a winter stubble. Around us in Montgomeryshire, we don't see much winter stubble anymore. And that's one of the reasons why farmland birds have declined a lot. But if any of you doing your surveys in the next week or two come across any fields with winter stubble, you will be likely to be rewarded with starlings, redwings, fieldfares, mixed finch flocks, skylarks, meadow pipits. Any of those could be there. And you can see just by looking lots of weeds there. The weed seeds will provide good feeding for a great number of different birds. So I'm a winter stubble fan. Another bird you might see on winter stubble is the meadow pipet. It's another bird that breeds up in the mountains. You can see from the shape of the beak, it's an insect eater. So insect eaters have fine bills, whereas seed eaters like finches and sparrows have thick bills. Meadow pipets are mostly insect eaters. And we have them in our farms, on our farms, in especially in autumn, winter, before they go back up to the mountains where they breed in spring and summer. What's not so usual is to see a meadow pipet like this sitting in the top of a tree. Normally they're on the ground. Here's the pied wagtail. It's a bird very much around where I live of villages and farms. This is a fine male with the black bib and the black cap. A female would be more grey. And that's the commonest of our three wagtail species. Often to be found in the farmyard itself. Many times pied wagtails will nest in farm buildings. The house sparrow will be familiar to most of you. People living in city centres will not be so familiar with them nowadays because their populations have crashed in centre of cities, but on farmland and in villages, house sparrows are doing well. This is the male. Females are more streaky and more dull. They don't have those chestnut tones in the plumage, but it's not our only sparrow. If you were very lucky, you might come across a tree sparrow. See the big black patch on the side of the cheek, and also the chestnut cap with no grey in the cap. So that's the tree sparrow, a declining species that nests in holes in trees or in bird boxes. And now we're on to the finches. The chaffinch here, this is a male with a rosy breast. The females don't have that rosy breast. The chaffinch is just beginning to sing. I'll play that in just a moment. Notice its white wing bar. That's always characteristic of both male and female chaffinches. Also, there's white in the outer tail. One of our commonest finches, the constituent of most finch flocks that you'd see in the winter, would be a chaffinch. This is the song. A cheerful little jingle repeated endlessly once they get going. They're only just beginning to start. And when they start, they're not so good at it. But after a couple of weeks, they get into the hang of it, and you'll hear it throughout spring and early summer. That's the chaffinch. Then the greenfinch, a bird that has declined a lot, partly because of a disease called trichomoniasis, which is associated with poor hygiene in garden feeders. So do clean out your feeders regularly. This is the male, very bright green, easy to identify. The female's much duller, not so obvious, and they will also form flocks with the chaffinches in the winter in the fields. So look out for greenfinches. This is the linnet, not particularly well known as a breeding bird, but they're seen in its breeding habitat of gorse. They love to nest in gorse bushes. This is the male, very bright pink on the breast. The female doesn't have that pink, so isn't so easy. And they too will follow the chaffinches and greenfinches in winter. So you get mixed finch flocks on your farmland bird surveys sometimes. So that's the linnet. Goldfinch is doing well. It has increased its population greatly in the last 20 years, mainly due to adapting to bird feeders. But it's to be found on farms, particularly in weedy fields in late summer where the thistles are seeding. They love thistle seed, and they will form big flocks around weedy seed of thistles. And my final species is the yellowhammer, a declining species that needs really thick hedges to nest in. And sometimes farmers are a bit too enthusiastic with their flailers when they flail their hedges, and they don't leave enough space for the yellowhammers to nest. This is the male. Notice the rufous rump and the lovely yellow head. This is the song. Little bit of bread and no cheese. Sometimes they forget the cheese on the end. I hope many of you will find yellowhammers in among your farmland birds as you look out for them. Now, the next slide is a bit of a quiz for you. So I'm going to put up 4 female species. There's one. White wing bar's a bit of a clue there. There's another one. Oh, there's not much to go on with that one. That's a difficult one. There's a bit of, oh yes, I think there's a bit of green in that wing. That could be a clue. And what about that bottom right? Well, there's that chestnut coloured rump again. We've seen that before. So what are those, I wonder? So top left, you've got the chaffinch with the white wing bar. Top right, greenfinch with the green in the wing there. Bottom right is the yellowhammer. These are all females, not so easy to identify. And bottom left, maybe the trickiest of all, is the linnet, female linnet. And no one says that farmland bird identification is always easy, especially in the winter. You're looking very often up against the light. You're looking at birds up in a tree. They're just silhouettes and they're not easy. But good luck with your surveys. And it's time to ask you if you've got any questions for me.
Thanks, Simon. If you're able to stop your share now, if not, I can do it for you.
Yeah, you can do that. Oh,
okay.
Yes.
Okay, I've stopped your share now. Thanks very much, Simon, for sharing your immense knowledge of many birds that are likely to visit farmland, as well as other areas in Brecon Beacons National Park and Wales, and of course across the whole of the UK, and also a few that aren't quite with us yet, but are ones to look out for in the coming months as we go into spring and summer. So thanks very much, Simon, for that. And it was really nice to hear some of the bird calls as well.
Good.
Because you don't always have to see a bird to actually know it's there, to recognise it, to record it. A lot of bird song is very easily learned, and you can tell what species you're hearing rather than actually seeing it. And as you say, birds aren't always that easy to see as they flit around, or they might be silhouetted against the bright skies that we hope we'll be getting soon. Okay, there's been quite a lot of activity in the chat, not too many questions.
That's a relief.
Yeah, so not too much extra work for you to do, Simon. We've got a few minutes. So one question was asked by Kate Lydiard Wine, who was asking about corn buntings. Do you know if there are still corn buntings in your area, Montgomeryshire or across Wales?
We don't have any in Montgomeryshire, but there's a declining population in Shropshire.
Right.
Which is our next county. There are good populations in Sussex, in the Hebrides, up in Scotland, but it is a declining picture. But there are two big projects, one in Sussex, one in the Hebrides, to try and understand what it is that's causing them to decline.
And I see, thanks Matt, I see you made a comment about the lack of corn buntings in Wales, and yeah, they're just over the border in Shropshire, it seems. So hopefully with these two projects, we might be able to encourage them back into Wales. Not necessarily bird related, but we had a question about bracken, and in the Brecon Beacons area, I know that quite a lot of bracken is harvested. I think there was a project a while ago to look at actually using bracken, because it is becoming quite dominant in some parts. And of course it leaves a stubble, but as Matt pointed out, that's not quite the same as a winter stubble in a farmer's field, because obviously there's lots of seed with the winter stubble in a farmer's field with the crops that they would have grown to make that stubble, whereas bracken doesn't really have any viable seeds, or it's got spores, so nothing there for the birds to eat. Although it is good to actually clear some of the bracken so you just don't get a monoculture of bracken, which again is not so good either. And I think it's the pearl bordered fritillary that likes bracken, not totally dominating bracken, but scattered bracken within a sort of more heathland habitat. And I know there's a project up in Montgomeryshire where you are, Simon, that's looking to improve the habitat in that area for the pearl bordered fritillary.
Yes, I'm involved with that.
Okay, that's good. Question here from Jackie Matthews, who thanks you for a very interesting talk.
Hello, Jackie.
He's asking about putting up a barn owl box. Barn owls came up in your talk, and would you put it in a barn or would you have it on a tree? So best place for a barn owl box?
On trees in Montgomeryshire. I know you're in Montgomeryshire, Jackie, and yes, we've got a wonderful barn owl group called the Montgomeryshire Barn Owl Group, and I'll put you in touch with them and they can take it forward. But yes, it will be up in a tree.
I have seen them. I don't think I've ever seen one on a tree. I have seen one in barns before. So I guess either, but maybe the birds, do you think the birds, Simon, favour boxes in trees, which maybe recreates their natural habitat of nest holes?
Well, it's mainly, the point is that in our area, tree nesting is still where most barn owls choose to nest, and the barn owl group has worked out that trees are the best place to put the boxes. They're big triangular boxes, so yeah, but they will take barn sites as well.
I noticed that Jackie says that she has boxes in trees and in the barn, so she got them in both places. So maybe a little bit of research from Jackie to see which are used more readily, whether the ones in the barn is preferred to ones in the trees or vice versa. So that's good to hear, barn owl boxes being up. I think that's it for the actual questions. We did get quite a lot of comments about different birds that people are seeing, which was really nice. There's a few questions on sort of bird of prey predation, but I'm going to leave those to the end after Matthew's talk, because it might come up during his talk. That'll be good. And just to reiterate the decline in curlews, David Chambers. Hello, David. I know David's farm. He says that curlews used to arrive on his farm around the 21st of March. He hasn't seen any for the last 3 years, so it kind of reinforces that fact that our traditional farmland birds are declining, although Ewham in Skethrog gets curlews every year still, so they're still making it to the east of the Brecon Beacons National Park here near Brecon. Okay.
Can I jump in there, Ben, and
Yes,
just say on the note of curlews that I think some people have said, oh, they used to have them every year coming back, and then the last 3 years or so they haven't had them anymore. And then the person you mentioned there that still gets them, obviously that's absolutely fantastic. But with curlew, they're such a long-lived bird that unfortunately what you can get is them being site loyal and coming back to the same fields each year, the same pair each year, but they may not have bred for the past 5 years or more. And then unfortunately, when those birds die, there's no young to replace them. And that's what we're seeing, you know, all over Wales and all over the UK. So if you can, if you've still got them coming back, try to find out if you know, if they're having chicks and if they're fledging. And if they are, then you're doing something right, because that's one of the main issues with them. Obviously, firstly is loss of habitat, and then the population's got so small now that any impact, such as from predation pressure, is really having a huge effect on them. So yeah, if you've still got them, try if you can without disturbing them to see if they've got chicks or you know, if they've got birds that are fledging.